Have you had an encounter with Mr. or Mrs. Tall, Dark, and Scary, and you'd like to hear it narrated on this channel? Well, if so, get busy and send me an email with all the details. You can email me at contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. Hey there, everyone. Welcome or welcome back, as the case may be. It's so good to see you. I'm glad you made it just in time. We're just about ready to head out to Sasquatch Valley. We have two good stories tonight, so grab your snackage, get your booty on in the saddle, and let's go. I'm not much of a storyteller, but I have one that I wanted to share with you. My name is Tim Hartwell, and I grew up in Tennessee. I now live in Northern California. To say that California is different from Tennessee is like saying the moon is different from the sun. It's an understatement. I attended UCLA and ended up falling in love. We got married and moved to her hometown in Northern California. Now that was in 1992. Over the last 30-odd years or so, I have learned to make Northern California my loving home. I've come to know it well. I've explored it extensively, and I really do love it here. I'm also that really annoying guy who likes to disappear into the forest for days at a time. I tend to speak about how the forest recharges me and all this hippie claptrap, as my wife says. But it's true. I've been called a granola muncher, a hippie trippy thing, a neo-hippie. I've been called all kinds of things, and I don't mind any of it. They're probably all true to some extent. I like the peace and the quiet that the forest gives me. It does recharge me. I go into the forest and I come back ready to face a world full of noise, demands, and pressure. My wife is loving and tolerant of what she calls my little mini vacations. Once upon a time, she used to enjoy it and accompanied me. But over the years, there's been a development of rheumatoid arthritis and another serious health issue, and those force her to not accompany me. But she doesn't mind that I still go to the forest. She encourages it. The redwood forests up here in Northern California are my favorite. Take a walk in a California redwood forest, and you will easily imagine that you've stepped back to some prehistoric time. The look and feel of a redwood forest is like nothing else on earth. One day I filled my pack up and headed out into the redwoods. I was only intending to stay one night. I remember it was a sunny September day. I saw other people that morning on the trails. By afternoon I saw less people, but that was usual. I knew where I was going. I had a favorite spot off the trail. I'd stayed there many times before. I don't want to say where I was exactly because, well, you're not supposed to camp there. But like I said, I've done it for more than a decade. While there, I never light a fire, though, for lots of reasons. I carry nothing to cook with. I only eat packaged food that all I have to do is open the package. Now, that's doable because I only stay out usually one night, maybe two. So I set up in this spot that I've used before. I mean, I've used that exact spot. But when I got there, I was pretty annoyed to find that someone else had been there recently. There was the visible remains of a fire. It was the fire that angered me. I sat up that afternoon and was just sitting there soaking up the bird song and all the air around me. Now, sometimes I'll sit up and then go off exploring around, but that day it just felt right to sit, relax, and enjoy the beauty of my surroundings. There was no breeze, so I was surprised when I heard a rustling somewhere in my area. It didn't sound like a person or an animal walking. It was more like a tree being moved back and forth or a tree limb. I was sitting there trying to figure out what exactly it sounded like. Then I heard it. A big crack. A tree limb had been pulled on until it broke off. I had that vision in my head. But I was puzzled because, well, who does that? And who could do that with their bare hands? A small limb I probably wouldn't have heard so clearly, but I heard that, and it wasn't somewhere close enough that I could see. So I thought that must be a really big tree limb according to the crack I heard. When it snapped, it was almost like a big gunshot of a crack. I even jumped a little, that's how loud it was. So we're not talking a small tree. After that big crack, it was silent for a second. Then there was the noise of more rustling. Now this noise was different. It was the sound of something walking and something being dragged. I remember sitting there thinking, huh? I was looking all around, but I didn't see anything. On about the second or third swivel of my head, I stopped. I saw it. It didn't see me. Maybe because I was sitting on the ground with my back to a tree. Maybe I blended in. I know my small one-person tent blended very well color-wise with the area. But what I saw was a very tall, hairy, human-like figure walking between the trees. I could see that it was dragging several big branches stacked behind it. I only could see it from the side, but I could tell this was a Sasquatch. The fabled Sasquatch that I've heard and read so much about. Even from the side, I saw the big old coconut-shaped head on it. It was hairy all over. Its arms were long and the legs were very thick from the side profile, as was its rib cage. I also recall the legs were very different from a human's. I mean that a human usually has a shorter torso relative to the length of their legs. What I saw that day had a very long torso in comparison to its legs. I don't mean to say that the legs were short, but it was a different ratio, or maybe proportion is the right word. I'm not sure which is correct to say. But the bend for the knees on that leg when it walked, they were almost dead center in the leg length. This is something I hadn't realized with humans. I guess you just see it so much, you take it for granted. But the knee joint on humans isn't dead center in the length of the leg. That was just a weird thing I had never really noticed. The hair on it was the color of a walnut shell, and it was very dull looking. Of course, I knew what I was looking at. I held my breath, not moving a muscle. I did not want to draw attention to myself. And I was sure it did not know I was there. Probably because I had just been sitting there for more than an hour, not moving. I had just been sitting there trying to sort out a problem for work. I'm not really great at guessing distances. When I got home, I tried to recreate the distance, and I measured it in my backyard. I would set something up, then measure it if I thought it was about as far as what I saw. Time and again, no matter what I used to set it up with, I consistently came up with about a 70 to 80 feet distance. Close enough that I'm sure of what I saw, but far enough away that I really can't give you more detail on it. I held my breath until it was completely gone, and then I held my breath for a few more seconds, and then, and only then, I allowed myself to move. I stood up slowly to make sure it was gone. I could barely see the dark blob of it, maybe for more than a couple seconds. Then it went down in a dip in the land, then turned and was gone in the trees. I know that I was in shock for quite a few minutes. But here's the really weird thing. It was after it happened, only after it was gone, that I got a case of the heebie-jeebies. And then I felt the hair standing up on the back of my neck and my arms. I only had that weird, scared, freaked-out reaction after it was gone, not while I was seeing it. After a couple of freaked-out minutes, I managed to come back to normal, and I had a serious talk with myself about whether or not I was staying there or going for the night. After a few minutes, I decided my best course was to relocate to another place I had that I favored. It was only about 45 minutes from there. I know that moving from one place to the other in roughly the same area doesn't mean much when we're talking about these kinds of beings. But for all I knew, it would be back right to that exact area to harvest more limbs for whatever its specific purpose might have been. I just didn't want to be right there. I have been asked, and no, I did not go investigate that area. Honestly, I had no idea what to do if I found things there, or even what I really should be looking for. Footprints, sure, I knew to look for those. But then what? And what do I do with that information? Now I know that I could have measured them with something next to them, taken pictures with my phone and all sorts of other things. But at that moment, I didn't think I knew any of it, and if I did, it wasn't coming to mind. I was sort of blanking out. I was trying hard to think, but every thought came up blank. I guess I was still in some kind of a shock mode. Besides, I hadn't gone there looking for Sasquatch. I was not prepared. And really up until that day, I hadn't give a real Sasquatch real thought. I'd heard about him, read about him, seen documentaries, all the normal things. But I didn't really contemplate Sasquatch. Do you understand the difference? Anyway, even if I had found prints, I promise you, there was no way I was going to follow that animal, that humanoid, or whatever it might be classified as. When I returned home and I told my wife, she was very upset with me. She asked me why didn't I just leave and come home. I told her that in all the years that I've been out there, I had never seen anything like it. I had never had a problem. And even if they're out there, well, I assured her they must be rare, and that I was afraid that if I had left the forest then and not spent the night, I would never go back. Sort of like getting back up on the horse after taking a fall. It was that kind of thing. And honestly, I'm glad I did go somewhere else that night. I still enjoy all the wild lands that Northern California has to offer, but I hope I never win the Sasquatch lottery again. Thank you for reading. Signed, Tim. Please, take my advice. If you are ever out and you find an old trail that looks like it's been rarely used or maybe hasn't been used in years, don't take it. There's a reason no one uses that trail anymore. Case in point, me, on the side of Mount St. Helens, very near Ape Canyon. In fact, I was on the Ape Canyon trail. I saw a break opening in the brush along one portion of the trail, long before we got up to the higher elevations. I followed it out of curiosity, thinking maybe I'd see some animals in their natural habitat, something I might not see on the trail. Well, I did, just not the kind of animals I was thinking of. This path was very overgrown, and within a few yards I thought I should back out, that maybe it wasn't a trail of any kind, maybe I was wrong. But something kept me walking. I kept a compass reading as I went, and I'm glad that I did, because the first time I turned to look behind me, I didn't see a clear way back. It didn't look like there was any trail. It was really that overgrown. I know, I should have stopped right then. But you know that I didn't, or I wouldn't have anything to write into your channel, would I? Just when I told myself, okay, this is far enough. It's time to turn back. Well, that's when I stepped into an area that was slightly more open, and I saw there was a stream running through it. I checked my map, and I figured that I was about a half-mile to the southeast of the famous part of Ape Canyon. I walked the stream for a little bit, but it was very difficult in spots, mostly because of the terrain. Also, recent rains had the creek overflowing in spots. There were times I said, okay, this really is the farthest point. What do you think you're doing? Turn back before you become hopelessly lost. I was forced away from the stream at one point, both because of water and terrain, but I tried to parallel it a bit longer. I can't even tell you why or what I was thinking. Then again, why does anyone do anything? It was a nice day, and I was just going with it and enjoying it. I really should have been paying more attention to things. I remember stopping and looking down at the compass that was on my wristband. I paused there for a few seconds, thinking about the direction I wanted to go, and I thought again, it's time to turn back. I heard that for about the 50th time in my head. Why I didn't listen, well, I don't know. I became then aware of a very low rumble near me. It started so low, it didn't register at first. It was like hearing a big truck rumbling off in the distance. Then it hit me like a thunderbolt. What I was hearing was very close. It wasn't something in the air like a plane flying by, and there were no roads close enough that I knew of. When I looked up, holy cow, a Sasquatch was not far from me. I actually almost peed myself. You know, I'd always heard that expression, and it didn't mean much to me. I never knew how that could actually happen. Well, let me tell you what it feels like. You see something that shocks and or scares you so bad, your whole body has, well, what I would call a tiny convulsion. It contracts and then lets every muscle go slack in a tiny fraction of a second. It's like a shock to your system. But in that tiny fraction of a second, well, the urine will flow. Those muscles have gone slack down there. And usually, from what I've read, once it starts, it's hard to stop. So that's how it happens. Now, I did not completely pee myself, but I came dangerously close. I definitely had some damp underwear, that's all I'm going to say. I don't like to admit that at the age of 38, but that was the truth. Now, I have often wondered if I had not stopped to check my compass and think about my direction, would I have walked right into it? But then another part of me reasons and says, no, it wasn't there before I checked my compass, because it was close enough I would have seen it. So I think it was waiting or hiding behind a tree. Maybe it was hunkered down, looking like a stump off the side. Maybe it uncloaked right in front of me like some big hairy Klingon, or whatever it is that Sasquatches do to suddenly appear right in front of humans, because I know I am not the only one this has happened to. I'm 6 foot, and it was a lot taller than me, and definitely a lot wider, at least 2.5 of me wide. The difference between us was like putting a 4th grader right up next to an NFL linebacker. The difference was that stark. Now, it's hard to really tell you how solid and real this Sasquatch was. We were no more than 20 to 25 feet apart. I had a clear look at its face. Now, I wasn't able to count nose hairs, but I saw enough to know that this thing was no joke. And I saw enough to know it was a female, and not a happy one. In that split second, my brain was screaming at me, and I heard things suddenly cracking and snapping. Just 2 or 3 snaps, but it was enough. Out of the corner of my eye over to my left, I saw what I took to be a very young Sasquatch walking up from where the stream was, presumably anyway. It was completely wet from head to toe, like it had fallen into the stream, or maybe it had intentionally went into the water for something. Bath time, maybe, or maybe it was hunting for some food. Then my brain was really screaming at me. I was in the area, the vicinity of a very young Sasquatch, and its very pissed-off mama. I held up my hands in defense and started backing up a few steps. I almost fell right on my rear because I was too afraid to look behind me to see where I was going. I did not want to take my eyes off Mama Squatch. I think I was saying things like, "Hey, I don't want any trouble. I'm just passing through. I'm leaving, okay?" I remember saying things like that. I was trying also to intentionally send those words as thoughts, because I seemed to think that I had read somewhere, maybe they can sense things or do some mind read or something. I wasn't sure, but I was giving it a shot. As soon as the baby Sasquatch saw me, it stopped dead. It dropped into like a squatting position, made itself very small, like a little furry ball. Now, if I hadn't seen it do that, I could have easily walked right by it and probably never looked at it with all the brush around it. When the baby Sasquatch stopped and dropped, Mama Squatch made a sound, something like a whistle and a grunt blended together, and then the baby Squatch popped up like a little jack-in-the-box and sprinted over to her. It ran behind her and immediately tried to climb up onto her back, but she stopped it without ever taking her eyes off me. She made it sit on the ground. I honestly thought, this is the day, this is the moment I was going to die. I saw no way out of this situation. I knew that if Mama Squatch came after me, I could do nothing to win that battle. I did have a pistol on me, but I would have to get it out of the Velcro pocket on the thigh of my leg, and I really didn't know if I could do that fast enough. There was a short distance between us. You know, I always thought that I would see trouble coming, and I would have time to get that pistol out. I don't think that anymore. Now, when Mama Squatch wouldn't let the juvenile onto her back, I had an immediate thought. She's getting ready for battle, and she did not want that baby on her. I don't know why, but I seem to recall that from some kind of a nature documentary. I don't think it was about Sasquatches, but some animal. I hoped I was wrong, but at that moment I was filled with terror and dread. I kept backing up, and then all of a sudden at once, Mama Squatch growled loudly, and she flew to me. She came within inches of my face and skidded to a stop. I know now they call this a bluff charge, but at the moment it scared me to death. It was honestly the closest in my life I've ever come to having an actual heart attack. I was hyperventilating, when I could breathe, that is. I was frozen completely. I could not make myself run. Later on, I was able to think back on this a little bit, and I think that part of me was too afraid to turn and run. I think I thought, somewhere in the depth of my mind, that if I was about to die, I wanted to see it coming. I did not want to be hit from behind and die face down in the dirt. I will say, Mama Squatch had some foul breath. It was worse than someone who's never brushed their teeth. It's the kind of stench that comes from rotting teeth in the mouth, and even worse. I know it was a bluff charge, and I think that Mama Squatch actually came closer than she planned. I, for my part, then snapped out of it, and I started retreating quickly. I turned, and I was now running blindly. I looked back, and I saw that she was just a few feet behind me. I put on extra speed when I looked back again, and her arms were now raised high above her, her hands balled together into one single fist, making a big club of her hands. I had the impression she was going to club me with them from above. I ran, and then I fell face first onto the ground, exactly how I did not want to die. I don't know if I tripped or if I was hit. I don't have a real clear memory. I remember rolling over, trying to get up as quickly as I could. But she was right there. She grabbed a hold of one of my ankles, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't get up. She started dragging me, and it's no understatement to say I was terrified for my life. During that run, I had managed to get my pistol out. I had the safety off, and it was in my hands when I hit the ground. So when I rolled over, it was still in my hand. When she started to drag me, I looked at her face. It was pure cold, and yet it was filled with fury and hate. I didn't hesitate. From my prone position on the ground, I fired point blank. Now, I know somebody out there is going to start crying and whining and telling me that I shouldn't shoot those cute and cuddly Sasquatches. Wrong. That thing had murder on its mind. Now, maybe I just walked into its territory where most humans never go. Maybe that was enough to make it angry. Maybe I got just too close to its youngster. Maybe it was a trap from the beginning so that I could join them for dinner, as in being the dinner. I have no clue, and really I don't care. I believe I did what I had to do, and I believe that anyone would have done the same. I fired 3 times, the first 2 hitting it in the stomach and then slightly above. The third shot hit it above its butt, around waist high, right on its back. I fired just as it turned. I wasn't trying to shoot it from behind on its back. So therefore, I did not fire a 4th. It was retreating, and all I could think of was my own retreat. I got up and I ran like a cat on fire through there. I came back out on Ape Canyon Trail, and I headed back down to the trailhead. It was kind of a blur the whole way, but I think I passed probably 10 people, and all of them probably thought I was insane or crazy. I was screaming, "Sasquatch, Sasquatch," every time I saw someone, and I wasn't stopping to say any more. I was so shook up, I almost couldn't work the key fob to get my car unlocked. I hit the panic alarm button repeatedly by mistake, drawing the attention of the few people that were still near the trailhead. When I got into my car and sat down, I realized I was shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I still had terror coursing through my whole body. I dropped my keys twice into the floorboard. You know, you see people in these movies and you think, how stupid. Just get a hold of yourself. Put the key in the ignition. But I tell you, it really isn't that easy sometimes, especially if you're scared. Now, I did make it home without causing any accidents on the way, incredibly, but I still felt like my stomach was in knots when I got home. My wife took one look at me and asked what in the world was wrong with me. Shaking, I broke down and I told her everything. I don't know if she believed me right then the first time. She said to call the police or something. She was convinced that I had been attacked by a person. I assured her I was not. Then she said, well, you need to call park people or rangers or whoever is in that area. There must have been a bear issue, and you're just not understanding what happened. I looked at her incredulously. I told her no. You know, bears don't have fingers that wrap around your ankle. She said a bear could certainly grab me by the ankle. I said if a bear had wrapped anything around my leg or ankle, it would have been a paw, and I would have claw marks. And I don't think a .22 pistol hitting a big bear a couple of times would have been enough to make it run off. After a while, she did listen, and I think she really did believe me even that night. In hindsight, I do have to say that if the situations had been reversed and it was her coming in and yelling that a Sasquatch had tried to grab her, I would have probably tried to apply some science to it to find a reasonable explanation. I would also have been telling her the whole thing was impossible because Sasquatch doesn't exist. So I forgive her for her initial reaction. It wasn't so out of the ordinary when you think about it. In the end, I chose not to report this officially. My wife's initial reaction, as well as that of my own brother and a friend when I told them about it, was enough to make me realize it was likely no one would believe me or take me seriously. Well, that's what I thought at the time. You see, I had no idea there were these Bigfoot organizations that would have perhaps listened to me. And then again, from what I've read, perhaps they wouldn't have. Well, it's been many years, so who knows? All I know is I came too close to a young Sasquatch, and it almost cost me my life. It might have been the equivalent of a human toddler in terms of its age. I really don't know. It was about 2.5 feet tall. That's the best I can guess. It was young enough the face was still very rounded. It wasn't sloped up like its mother's yet. They both had the same reddish-brown fur, more brown than red in it. And the fur on the baby was totally wet, so it was a dark red. Now, after all of this, I began to look more into the whole Ape Canyon affair from 1924. I had always been skeptical. Of course I'd heard about it. You can't live in Washington and not have heard of that. But now I believe every word of it. I have to say, that whole area, everything around Mount St. Helens, it has always been filled with unusual sightings, happenings, and encounters, going all the way back to the natives who have always said that mountain never belonged to humans. It belonged to the forest people, meaning Sasquatch. Now, Sasquatches on their own, they're scary enough, but finding yourself in front of a mad mama Squatch, that's next level. To this day, I can't tell you why I went off trail, but I can honestly tell you I never stray from the trail anymore, and I strongly suggest you don't do so either. All right, my Sasquatch. I loved both of those, but man, I don't think I'd ever want to be near a mama Squatch if her baby's nearby. I think he's lucky to have escaped with his life. I don't think he would have if he hadn't had that pistol, but that's just my opinion. So you guys let me know what you think of these down in the comments below. All right, everyone. Well, I think that's going to call it to a close for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed them as much as I have. Thanks a lot. And we're going to be getting together again in just a few days. So until then, have a great weekend. And always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.